um, competing factions who are competing with different agendas. There's a lot of overlap, and the key to progress is like finding areas in which you can cooperate, where faculty and students want the same thing, and then it's easiest to move forward. But that's not always so easily done, and it's always made harder when money is tight. And so in this coming year and the next couple of years, where we're going to be seeing the economic impact of the pandemic, I think a lot of public education is going to be under threat of budget cuts, or the number of classes offered being reduced. Maybe that slows down progress towards a degree. Do you shed faculty? Maybe. And that means you can offer fewer courses, which slows down progress towards a degree. Do you ease the requirements to be more flexible and help students get their degree? Well, there's a temptation with that, but then you may be thrusting students out into the job market without some of the knowledge and competency you think that they need to succeed. So we're going to see what happens, and it's just not clear. It's not clear at Baruch. It's not clear at CUNY. It's not clear in New York State. It's not clear in the United States Congress. And there are sometimes campaigns where education is a very explicit issue, and there's sometimes campaigns where it's less so. I think one of the interesting issues, educational issues, that's received a lot of coverage in the last few years is student debt. And should the government step in and eliminate student debt or ease the terms of student debt? Many people think it's a good idea. Many people think it's not, that it doesn't help the people who are most in need. So it's a misallocation of resources. I know this is an issue for many of you, even though, just given the nature of CUNY tuitions, you probably have a lot lower debt than people who've attended private colleges and universities. I know there are articles in the newspaper and other media now and again about students who have taken on $200,000 or $300,000 worth of debt to complete a PhD or get through law school or get through medical school. And then they find each year the interest on the debt grows more than the interest on the debt is greater than the amount of payments they're able to make. And so someone might graduate from law school owing $200,000, and 10 years later they owe $300,000. It doesn't seem to be a tolerable system, but that's something very much in the news, and we will see what the new administration and the new Congress is willing to do about it. A second issue that has been on people's minds, and I think among the more prominent people, it was Bernie Sanders who first made this a major issue, and that is the notion of free higher education. And there are a substantial number of people who feel like public education should be free, certainly at least through the community college level, maybe through the four-year college level, and that higher education is a basic need. It's good for society. If people become educated, why not make it easier for them? Well, it's a great idea, but of course, where does the money come from? And different people have different ideas. Increase taxes, particularly increase tax on the wealthy, reduce military spending. There are many different ideas, but this is a very hot political issue and a very important one. And if I can just throw in another indicator of how old I am, when I attended CCNY, it was free. There was no tuition. And it was only trying to think when this was, sometime around 1970, the New York State government decided to create the CUNY system and the SUNY system and sort of establish them on parallel tracks. And because they wanted to have tuition at SUNY, and they needed that because they were starting it from nothing, and so they needed a lot of startup money, they felt it was only fair to have tuition at CUNY as well. And I remember I was an undergraduate and then a graduate, student demonstrations of trips to lobby, to meet with lawmakers and urge them to continue free tuition. I know when I was an undergraduate, I probably could not have afforded to attend college if there was tuition. In fact, I mean, this is a wonderful footnote. The first year I was at CCNY, there was no tuition, and the total student fee was $14. And the second year, the fee was raised to $24. And there was a sit-in in protest. And the protesters, and I was one of them, were saying, well, first of all, that's an increase of $10 over 14. That's like a 70% increase. Second of all, there was no student voice in the decision-making process. There were no hearings. But it's a measure of the times that over that $10, people were willing to have a sit-in. But we're now in a place where at many places, public education is still reasonably affordable, but still a great burden to many students and many families. I think a majority of students at the City University receive financial aid of some sort, in many cases, a great deal of financial aid. And that's as it should be, I think. But where does the money come from? And that's the hot political issue and societal issue. And that is one that runs through all of education and runs through all news coverage of education. I just want to, there's one other issue that's sort of peripheral to education that I'm very interested in and have written about and I follow fairly closely, so I want to mention, although it's not so much an issue at City University, but that is collegiate sports and what I think of as the professionalization of collegiate sports, where there are colleges where sports is an enormous part of the college program, where the sports programs at schools like Alabama and Texas bring in literally tens of millions of dollars a year. The University of Texas 2 years ago had an athletics budget that produced $82 million in revenue. So that becomes very important to the university. That money is used. I mean, you can think of college sports as marketing, right? Because it gets the school on TV every week as a source of pride. But it's a very peculiarly American conceit. In most countries of the world, university sports are not played for revenue. Many universities do not have varsity teams in sports. Their matches are not broadcast. Tickets are not sold. And I think that, so to some extent, I think it's a distortion of the educational process. I do wonder about the education of students who are essentially playing professional sports while they're in college, except, of course, they're not getting salaries. So it's a wonderful, racket's a strong word, but you have universities who employ their students as great revenue sources. I mean, to borrow a term from technology, the athletes are the content providers. Without them, there's nothing. So they're generating all this valuable content, and then the revenue goes to the college, not to the students. They're not paid salaries. So it's just beginning to change a little. It requires changes in rules, changes in law, but I think that's slowly coming, and it should be. Just as a footnote to all of this, one of the things that's really fascinating is if you look at who are the highest paid public employees in most states. And you might think, well, it's probably the governor because he's the top paid employee in the state. Well, actually, as of 2 years ago, last year I saw the data, in 42 states, the highest paid employee on the public payroll was either the men's varsity football coach or the men's varsity basketball coach at the major public university. So think about this. The football coach makes more money than other members of the faculty, makes more money than the college president, makes more money than the governor of that state. So who has more power? Who has more juice? It seems to me a distortion of the educational process, and one we are, mercifully not afflicted with in the city university, where I think, my issue is I think the name Bearcats is stupid. I may be lonely in this fight. I tried to organize a Kill the Bearcat campaign a few years ago. People thought I was nuts and meant it literally. But I feel like, if we were sitting in class and a bearcat came and knocked on the door one day, none of us would know what it is. I mean, like, what's a bearcat? And why would a bearcat be representing Baruch? I think we should have an indigenous animal, a sparrow, the fighting sparrows of Baruch College, or the river rats. How would that be? Or the pizza rats. You could have the Baruch pizza rats. That would get a lot of headlines. So, if you have some spare time and want to join me in a lobbying campaign, we could do that. But anyway, here I've tried to lay out what I think are some of the important issues in public education. I have no doubt missed some of them. But I encourage you, if you're interested, to follow this news. And if you're interested in being a journalist who covers it, I think you will find demand and opportunities when you can demonstrate you're knowledgeable about it. Let me just close with a couple of notes. One is I've noticed that I seem to have a bad case of hat hair. I don't know why. I haven't worn a hat in months, but there it is, and I didn't notice it until I had started taping, so hope you're having a good laugh at my expense. Second thing is that this is the time of year when you are asked to go online and do your evaluations of your courses. And I think this is important, and I think this year in the pandemic and with asymmetric courses like ours, it's particularly important to give us a sense of what's worked for you, what we could do better. I think all teachers follow the results closely, and department chairs like me follow them very closely and look for ways to learn from them. So please do that. It takes you 3 minutes online, but I'd very much like you to get that done in the next week. And finally, as you probably know, we have one more week. Our topic for next week is energy and the environment. And what I'm going to put in the folder are some very good podcasts on environmental issues and climate change. Some of them created by Emily Johnson, my colleague. And there will be no assignment. I've sort of tried to back off on the weekly assignments, knowing that you're nearing the end in this class and all the others and have a lot of work to do. And just to make sure you know the calendar, classes end on Wednesday, December 9th, a week from today, with the exception of Saturday and Sunday classes, which end the following weekend, the 12th and 13th. All weekday classes end on December 9th. The 10th and 11th have been designated as reading days for your final exams. And just so you know, every year the faculty are instructed that if you're giving a final exam, it must be given at the scheduled exam time. You may not do it on the last day of class. You may not do it during the reading days. If you feel that a faculty member is violating that rule, they should be reported. And if you don't know how to report it to me, and I'll report it to the appropriate parties. But I think we really try hard to have a structured set of schedules that reflect the huge stress on the students of the exams. So I hope they go well for you. I look forward to you reading your final projects and your evaluations. And my intent with grading is to get my final grades submitted before Christmas. So, probably the weekend before, I'll be spending long days doing the grading in all of my classes. And when I post the grades, I will also email each of you your grade and the underlying calculation. And I will remind you at the time, but I'll just say it here now. You always have a right to understand how your grade is calculated. That should be true in any course. And if you don't understand the calculation, you should ask for it. And if you think it's unfair or wish to dispute it, you should do that as well. I think that grading is taken seriously. I know it's very serious for many students. And I think you have a right to have it be open and fair, even if you disagree with the outcome. So please feel free to exercise that right, whether it's with me or if you're having a problem in another course and I can be an advisor, a support system, please call on me. So with that, I will wrap up this lecture. I'm just going to see if I get my dog into the picture here briefly, who has been accompanying, guarding me. Where are you, Wesley? There he is. This is Wesley. Wesley is a schnoodle, which is a cross of a schnauzer and a poodle. And he's 7 years old and guards me closely. In my synchronous class, every couple of weeks, people ask to see Wesley. And then half a dozen students go and get their pets and bring them into the camera, and it makes for a better class. So I'm sorry we haven't had the opportunity to do this as a group. So this is my penultimate lecture. I will be back to you at the beginning of the week, probably on Monday, with my final lecture. And thanks for sticking with me. And again, I apologize for the technical problems yesterday.